You keep checking your life against a schedule, a certain age for a certain milestone, a certain year by which certain things were supposed to be settled. Nobody ever actually handed you that schedule. You built it out of other people's timelines, quietly, without noticing, and now you measure yourself against it like it was real all along. It was never real. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a specific, detailed picture of what should be true by a certain age. The career milestone, the relationship status, the financial marker, the general sense of having things figured out. Nobody actually wrote this schedule down and handed it to you with any authority to back it up. It got assembled quietly from family expectations, from people around you, from a general cultural noise about what on track looks like. And once assembled, it started operating like fact, even though it was never anything more than an average, a guess, a composite built from other people's very different lives. The specific feeling of being behind rarely comes from an honest look at your own life. It comes from comparison, measuring your current position against someone else's, usually without the full picture of what actually got them there. You see the version of someone else's life that gets shown, not the version that was actually lived. The setbacks, the false starts, the years that didn't go anywhere. None of that makes it into the comparison. You end up measuring your complete, messy reality against someone else's edited highlight reel and concluding, unfairly, that you're the one falling short. A race only makes sense to judge by time if everyone started at the same starting line. Almost nobody's life actually works this way. Someone who reaches a milestone earlier than you may have started with resources, circumstances, or support you never had. Someone reaching it later may have overcome obstacles that simply weren't part of your path at all. Comparing finish times without accounting for wildly different starting points was never a fair measurement to begin with, and yet it's the exact measurement you've been quietly running yourself against. Different people build meaningful careers, relationships, and lives on wildly different timelines, and both the early and the late versions turn out completely fine, far more often than the anxious comparison in your head would ever admit. Some people find their direction early and move in a straight line toward it. Others spend years exploring, changing course, apparently starting over more than once, and end up somewhere genuinely good anyway, just by a route that looked nothing like a straight line while they were living it. Neither path is the correct one. They're just different paths, and yours doesn't need to resemble anyone else's to be working. Here's a distortion worth naming directly. You're comparing your current chapter, maybe your third, maybe your fifth, to someone else's 20th, and feeling like you've failed by comparison. You're not seeing their chapter 3. You're seeing where they ended up after years you weren't present for, measured against where you are right now. This comparison was never fair, and it was never actually telling you anything true about your own trajectory, only making you feel behind in a race that was never actually structured the way you assumed it was. This isn't a harmless mental habit. The anxious sense of being behind pushes people into decisions made from panic rather than genuine readiness, rushing a relationship, forcing a career move, abandoning something that was actually working simply because it didn't match an imaginary deadline. Decisions made to catch up to a fake schedule tend to serve the schedule, not your actual life. The things worth building rarely respond well to being rushed for the sake of a timeline that was never real to begin with. The only comparison that actually tells you anything useful is the one between where you are now and where you were before, not between you and anyone else's different life, running on different terrain with a different starting point. Are you more capable than you were a year ago? More honest with yourself? Handling difficulty better than you used to? These questions have real answers, and the answers actually mean something. The question of whether you're ahead or behind some invisible collective schedule has no real answer, because the schedule was never real in the first place. There is no such thing as being on time or late for a life, in the way the phrase gets used. There's only the actual, specific path you're on, moving at whatever pace it's actually moving, shaped by circumstances nobody else fully shares. The moment you stop measuring against an imaginary schedule, you get to actually see your own progress clearly, not distorted by a comparison that was rigged against you from the start, built on a timeline that was never yours to begin with. None of this means abandoning effort or urgency where it genuinely matters. It means directing that effort toward your actual life, instead of toward catching up to a deadline someone else's life happened to produce. Picture redirecting the energy that used to go into anxious comparison toward the next honest step actually available to you today. Not because a schedule demands it, but because it's the right next step for the specific life you're actually building. This isn't a belief adopted once and finished. It's remembered over and over, every time the old comparison creeps back in, noticing it, naming it for what it is, and returning attention to your own actual path instead. None of it happens all at once, but it accumulates into someone who stops running a race against a schedule that was never real, and starts actually living the specific, unrepeatable life in front of them. You are not behind. There was never a schedule you were supposed to keep, just your own path, moving at its own honest pace. If this reached you today, share it with someone who needs the reminder.